Hi friends. I invite you all to listen to a brand new story.
The heat came off the marsh like breath from a sleeping beast. It shimmered over the cattails and turned the far cottonwoods into watercolor smudges. I wasn't supposed to be there. Dad had said it 1,000 times. Stay away from Stillwater Marsh when the sun's high. It looks still but it swallows. But I heard a sound I couldn't ignore. At first I thought it was a goose complaining in the reeds. Then I heard it again, a thready, broken whine, the kind you hear from a puppy that thinks the world forgot about it. I was 10, bare-kneed in cutoffs, an orange ball cap twisted backward on my head. The path ended where the ground gave up and the water began, and the air smelled like warm mud, fish, and something sour. Hello. I called, like an idiot calling to a sound that wasn't a person. Another whine. A splash. And then I saw him, or what I thought was him. A big dog, gray as river stone and slick with muck, sunk to his shoulders in a pocket of black water. He didn't thrash. He didn't even try. His head lay on a hummock of grass the size of a dinner plate, and his ears flicked like he was listening to a faraway station only he could hear. I forgot Dad. I forgot rules. I forgot everything. There were old fence rails thrown in a heap near the game trail, somebody's busted project, sunburned and splintered. I dragged them one by one, lay them down like a shaky boardwalk tested with my weight. The muck grabbed at my sneakers and slurped each step like it wanted a taste of me too. It's okay, I told him. I've got you. I've got you, okay? His eyes were shut. Flies worried at his nose. I knelt and the board jerked under me. Up close I saw why he hadn't moved, why he couldn't. Rust ate the metal like old blood. The trap held his back leg in a bite of iron, deep and mean, the kind of thing Dad said only a coward sets. I'd seen one in Dad's shed, a humane demonstration he called it, to show me how they worked and why people weren't allowed to use them out here anymore. I remembered the way he'd pinched the springs with his boots and how the jaws trembled before they let go. My heart beat so hard it made the world wobble. Okay, I whispered, we're doing this. I set my sneakers on the slick, curving springs, grabbed a fence post for balance and put everything I was into it. 10 years old, 95 pounds soaking wet, the entire summer of Montana sun threaded through my bones. The springs moaned. The jaws twitched. I pushed again. A squeal like something dying in a hinge. The rust gave, the trap relaxed, and I yanked the heavy jaw with both hands. The leg slid free. He didn't move. I clamped my lips together because crying would make the marsh smell crawl into my mouth and I'd never stop gagging. Hey, I said, shaking his shoulder. Hey, wake up. He was heavy as a sack of wet grain. I got my arms under his chest and heaved. Something in my back pinched, but I didn't care. Inch by inch I pulled him onto the boards, then to a thicket of willow where the ground was only half treacherous. I collapsed beside him, seeing spots, my heartbeat crashing like thunder in my ears. When the world came back, I pressed my ear to his ribs. A beat, thin, stubborn. Still there. I don't know how long I sat like that. It could have been 5 minutes or an hour. Dad's whistle floated down the wind from our place on the far side of the cottonwoods. Supper time. My name followed, long and sharp. Emma. I flinched. He'd kill me if he found me here. Not literal kill, but the kind where his face went to stone and his voice got quiet, and you'd trade a yelling for that voice any day. I glanced at the far fence line where the pasture met the trees. The old Miller barn sat there, a leaning wreck with a roof that sagged like a bad tooth. It belonged to nobody now. Grady Miller had let it rot after the county pulled his permits. Dad said Grady wasn't right, and sometimes not right people picked not right friends. Traps didn't set themselves. I hooked my arms around the dog and started dragging. He was too heavy to carry, so I did it sideways, rolling and hauling, scooting him through the meadow grass in fits. My palms glazed with sap, my knees mashed burrs into my skin, the wet stink of the marsh climbed into my nose and stayed. By the time the barn's door yawned in front of us, bright with late sun and dust, I heard Dad again, closer, calling from the porch. Emma? You answer me. I'm coming. I yelled and my voice cracked. I shoved the dog inside, pulled the door shut till it caught, and stood with my forehead to the wood until my breathing evened out. You'll be okay, I told him with my mind because my mouth had quit. I ran home with the marsh on me. Dad was on the steps, ranger green shirt sleeves rolled, his hat pushed back, the lines around his eyes deeper than they'd been that morning. My mom, Kelly, who could read a storm in laundry and burn pancakes when she was thinking, leaned in the kitchen doorway. What's on you? Dad asked, taking in the smear on my shins, my shoes making sounds no shoe should make. I fell by the ditch, I said too fast. The ditch is dry. I tripped, I tried again. He watched me like he watched strangers who parked where the sign said not to. Then he exhaled through his nose, slow. Wash up. We're eating. At dinner I stabbed my fork at green beans while Mom talked about Mrs. Zajac finding a mountain lion print behind the school dumpsters, and Dad said it was probably a dog, and Mom said she knew a dog from a lion. Thank you. My mind was in the barn, on a heartbeat beating in a chest that was too heavy for a dog. I waited until the TV was up loud and the dishes were stacked. I swiped a mixing bowl, filled it from the backyard spigot, and snagged 2 leftover pork chops wrapped in foil. I'm taking this to the porch, I called and slipped out through the screen. The barn was a darker shadow against the tree line now. Night gathered in the hollows and made the yard feel smaller. I kept low, following the fence till I could duck behind the lilacs, then sprinted the last few yards and slid through the gap I'd made earlier with my foot. Inside, the dust smell was thick, the old boards ticking as they cooled. "Hey," I whispered, juggling the bowl and the foil. "It's me." Something moved in the corner. I aimed my flashlight. A pair of eyes caught the beam, yellow, not brown, not blue. They didn't blink. They didn't shy. They looked at me through me. He wasn't a dog. The word slid over my mind and left a cold. Even at rest he was huge, muscle under ruined fur, paws like the mitts Dad wore to stack brush in January. The belly fur was mottled, the shoulders peppered with a darker gray. The trap had left raw meat and swelling high up on his back leg. He lifted his head as if from underwater, watching my hands like he could read what they'd do next. Every wilderness safety talk Dad ever gave me woke up in my bones and yelled. "Don't run. Don't scream. Make yourself big. Back away slowly." The flashlight trembled in my fist. "It's okay," I said, and I meant it like a wish. I set the bowl down, slid the pork onto the dirt 2 feet away and back to the opposite wall. "You're safe here." He didn't touch the food. He watched me. And then, as if some invisible line had moved an inch in the dust between us, he turned his head and drank, the water shivering under his tongue. I don't know how long we sat like that, me talking, him listening, or maybe just resting with the sound of me rubbing the emptiness off the barn. I told him about how we'd moved from Idaho to Montana last fall and how the kids in Stillwater were nice enough but didn't know what to do with someone who loved bugs and books. I told him about Dad's new post with fish, wildlife and parks, about the way Mom smelled like lemons and acrylic paint when she made signs for church fundraisers, about how I missed my old room and the old view of fields that were oat in summer and gold in fall. He blinked once, flicked an ear. When the water was gone, he let his nose hover over the pork. Then he looked back at me as if asking permission. "Please," I murmured. "You need it." He ate. I was still sitting there, warm with relief, when footsteps crunched outside, heavy, uneven. Not Dad. Dad walked like the ground belonged to him and he was taking care of it. These steps were mean in a way you could hear. The barn door tried to move. It clunked on the latch. "Damn thing," a voice muttered. "Dry as cedar. Come on now." I knew that voice. Everybody in Stillwater knew it. Grady Miller. The man who used to run fence for 3 ranches at once, who lost 2 fingers to a saw and blamed the county for it. The man Dad didn't like to talk about but looked toward the road when his truck rolled by. People whispered about tags punched twice, about bait where bait didn't belong, about a trap line that never ended. "Where'd you go, you mangy?" The latch rattled. Silence. Then his boots scraped gravel as he moved along the wall. My heart lodged up under my tongue. Across the barn, the wolf's hackles lifted, and a low growl rolled out of him like distant thunder. He couldn't run. He couldn't fight like this. I couldn't let Grady see him. Not like this, not here, not with my hands on it. I slid to the door and dropped the old iron hook into the bracket I'd found during the day. The door had swelled, it would hold. A long minute stretched thin. Then Grady spat, PD, against the wood and shuffled off, muttering to himself. The wolf's growl faded to a hum. He laid his head on the straw again, watching the slice of light under the door like it might tell him the future. "We're okay," I breathed. "We're okay." We were not okay. It didn't take long for okay to find a new definition and be worse. 3 mornings later, Dad found a track outside the barn. A print as clean as a stamp, the dew making it shine. Not dog. He didn't say it. He didn't need to. I saw the word land in him and make his shoulders go tight. He went very quiet. He walked back to the house like he carried something balanced that would break if he rushed. He unlocked the gun cabinet he never unlocked in daylight and took out the double barrel he saved for snakes too dumb to leave the porch and for mercy shots on creatures nobody could save. "Where is he?" he asked me on the porch. His voice was calm the way lakes can be calm the minute before lightning hits them. My mouth filled with sawdust. "Where's who?" "Emma." I took a breath to tell the best lie I could imagine. Then I didn't. Because lying would stack one wrong thing on top of another wrong thing and the tower would fall all over both of us. In the Miller barn, I said. He was in a trap. I got him out. Color left Dad's face like someone turned a knob. You can't, he started, then cut himself off. He looked toward the barn, toward the line of cottonwoods, toward the marsh as if every corner of the world had betrayed him at once. Get in the house. I can't let you. Get in the house. I didn't. I ran. I was 10. I ran because my legs knew the way and because the thought of that gun was a white-hot thing in me that burned logic to smoke. I got to the barn door on the same breath Dad reached the shadow of the cottonwoods. I flung it wide. The wolf came up on 3 legs, lips deepening into a question that might turn into an answer if I didn't move right. I moved right. I put myself between him and the light. Dad filled the doorway, the gun hung low, his mouth a hard line. Please, I said, not even sure who I was speaking to. Please, he won't. The wolf bared his teeth, the sound in his chest sharp enough to lift the tiny hairs along my arms. I did the only thing my whole stitched-together heart had to give. I made myself bigger, not with my body but with the way I loved him. I spread my arms and stood in front of a creature who could break me in a second and a father who could save me in less. Dad's eyes flicked. My skinny wrists, the pumping vein in my throat, the barrel he didn't want to lift. He set his jaw as if the muscles there could hold the world from breaking. Then, in a move so sudden it was almost gentle, he swung the door shut from the outside and slammed the heavy bar across it. A lock. Pause. His boots on the porch gravel, retreating. Dad. I pounded the wood. Dad. His voice came back steady from a distance that was only a few feet and felt like 3 counties. We'll talk when everybody's safe. I turned to the wolf. He'd stopped growling. He was listening to my heart like it was a sound he could follow out of a maze. I sank to the straw. Every feeling I had tried to tear loose at once. It's okay, I told him. It's not. But it will be. For the first time since the marsh he moved toward me, slowly, not a sneak, not a hunt, just a weight coming near a weight. He lowered that big, heavy head and touched my knee with his nose as if to say, I hear you. I would have stayed like that all day, but nothing in Stillwater stays quiet when the wrong person hears the right words. By afternoon, the street outside our place hummed with trucks that didn't belong there. People stood at the end of our drive with their arms crossed, their faces set. Fear looks like anger if you don't know better, and this looked like anger. Grady's voice rose above the rest. Open up, John. Turn it over. You and your out-of-state rules ain't gonna get some kid dead. Dad walked out with his empty hands up. Go home, he said. Sheriff's on his way. This is state land business now. State my... Grady swung his axe up and marched 2 steps before 3 of our neighbors grabbed his arms and pulled him back, more out of surprise than mercy. And then, like the sky had been waiting for the cue, an engine note wound up the road. Not the sheriff's Tahoe. A white Ford van with a red cross and a logo that made every nerve in my body unclench at once. Northern Rockies Wildlife Rescue. The woman who dropped from the driver's seat wore scrubs under a denim jacket and had a face built for bad days, kind and sharp where it had to be. Olivia Carter, she said to Dad over the murmur. You called. Thank you, Dad said, and I heard the break in it, soft as paper tearing. The crowd quieted when Olivia told them the sheriff was 2 minutes out and that if anyone wanted to talk about traps, a deputy would be happy to. The blue lights swam up the road, and the sheriff's hand settled on Grady's shoulder like a blessing that wasn't. The axe clanged on the gravel. Olivia loaded the tranquilizer rifle and glanced at Dad. Let's do this fast and clean. Dad lifted the bar. He nodded to me once, something between an apology and a promise, and eased the door open. The barn was empty. For a second the world went silent in a way that only happens when something enormous is thinking about you. Dad stepped inside, looked right, left, up into the bones of the rafters like maybe the wolf had grown wings. Olivia went to the back wall where the boards were soft with rot. She crouched, shone a flashlight through a gap wide enough for a big dog to shove through if he had to. Beyond, the ground was scuffed with prints. One drag mark. A drop of blood like a dark coin. He's gone, Olivia said. He followed the kid. I didn't breathe until the sheriff's radio cracked, and even then it felt like pretending. For weeks after that, Dad went out at dusk and came back smelling like pine and creek. He set cameras where the ridgeline pinched into a draw and where the aspens stood so tight the wind could only hum through them. He didn't tell me what he found at first and I didn't ask, but some truths get restless if you don't let them out. One night he brought his laptop to the kitchen table and slid it toward me. Look, he said. The photo was grainy, the color smeared. Night vision makes everything look like it's been dead a little while. But he was there, my not dog, my wolf, standing alone over a rabbit, his head turned toward the camera as if he'd heard it think. One back leg hovered. The muscles along his ribs made the kind of pattern you only get from getting hungry and staying alive anyway. "He's working the outside edges of the park," Dad said. His finger traced a map on a napkin. "He's smart. He's keeping clear of the trails. But he's drifting toward town. Toward us." I don't think I slept much that week. I lay awake and listened to the way our house made sounds when it didn't know you were listening. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the hot water tank settling, the far hiss of trucks on Highway 93 pretending the dark wasn't there. At 3 one morning, our new puppy Jasper, because Mom said the house needed something small and ridiculous in it or we'd all turn into weathered fence posts, went off like a car alarm at the back door, hackles so high they made a new dog. I eased the curtain. The grass beyond the porch glowed silver, the fence line a black stitch against the meadow. I didn't see anything. Jasper did. He growled and bawled and quivered like the idea of outside might jump through the glass and eat us whole. Dad came down the hall fast, bare feet, t-shirt twisted. He didn't say probably a raccoon. He didn't say anything. He took the flashlight from the hook with a hand that knew the weight of it too well and went out. He walked the fence and shined the ground and stood for a long time by the cottonwoods where the pasture leaned toward the park. When he came back he didn't meet my eyes. "Bed," he said, and the word felt like a prayer he didn't think anybody was hearing. The next afternoon, the Johnsons on the edge of town lost a ewe. The fence board wasn't broken so much as nudged. The prince told a story anybody could read if they wanted to. The sheriff came and shrugged, because shrugging is a safer thing than deciding. Dad shut his eyes in a way that said he'd decided something and didn't like it. He called Olivia. He put the phone down very carefully after. "What will they do?" I asked because I was old enough to ask and young enough to hope. "Try to trap and move him," Dad said. "Or hold him if he keeps pushing into stock." "Hold him where?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, while the house breathed its slow human sleep, I packed. Not the way you pack for running away to your grandma's with peanut butter crackers and a library book. The way you pack when your bones tell you a thing will happen to a heart if you don't put your body in the way of it. I took water. 2 granola bars. Mom's old headlamp. My courage, which wasn't much but wanted to be. I left a note that said I was sorry and that I loved them and that I'd be back before the birds asked the day to start. The meadow was colder than I thought it would be. The headlamp made a bright little raft of light and everything beyond it into a feeling. I found the game trail that stitched the fence to the creek to the cottonwoods. The cottonwoods to the notch in the ridge where I'd seen Dad go 2 nights in a row. If I were a wolf, I thought, I'd move where the wind moved and I wouldn't step where people wanted me to. I'd hold the slope and keep my body a thought tucked behind trees. "Gray," I called softly because names are bridges whether the other side knows it or not. "It's me." He answered with silence, and then with a shape that slid out of shadow like it had been poured. He stood on the far side of a small clearing, his head high, a deer crumpled at his feet. Moonlight found his ribs and made them steps I wanted to climb and didn't dare. He watched me come so far as the edge of the grass and stop. I lifted my palms to show him the emptiness of them. "They're coming," I said. "Tomorrow." I don't know if he understood the words or just the way I spilled them. He flicked an ear, every muscle turning a degree toward me. That was when the forest changed. A twig snapped. Then another. A whisper of feet on duff. 2 shapes flowed between the trunks, bigger than Gray, carrying themselves like gravity had rules for other things. Their eyes didn't look at me. They looked through me and the hair along my neck prickled like I'd swallowed lightning. But they held him in a slow half-circle, careful and sure. This wasn't about the deer. This was about a line drawn before I was even born. Gray stiffened. The wounded leg trembled and held anyway. He showed his teeth, not a promise but a history. The leader moved first. He feinted, light, a test of what Gray would give. Gray gave the right answer and the wrong one. He held his ground. The clearing filled with sound, the burr of growls, the bark-bit clack of teeth, the whisper of paws cutting the grass. I didn't think. Thought would have told me to shut up and hide and let the world be what it was before me and after me. I ran out into the clearing and made myself a ridiculous thing, flailing arms, 10-year-old voice trying to be a storm. Hey, get out. The leader stopped as if someone had tugged a string attached to his spine. He stared. The second wolf paused, uncertainty visible even in the way his ribs moved. In that drop of time, Gray put himself between me and a world that doesn't bend. His shoulder brushed my thigh, solid and hot. I don't know if the leader saw the human in me or the wolf in Gray or both at once and decided this was a knot he didn't need to put his teeth on. He huffed, annoyed, almost embarrassed, then blew past and melted into the trees. The second followed, his tail not quite as high. We were alone with the deer and the breath that shook out of me like something I hadn't paid for yet. Gray turned to me. He was bleeding from a rake along his flank, bright in the moon. He pressed his nose into my palm and just left it there a second. If touch can be a sentence, that touch said mine and yours, and we made it to the next minute. We have to go, I said. Come on. He followed me through the trees, not close like a dog on a heel, but near enough to be a thought shadowing mine. We came out of the cottonwoods into our yard just as the sky remembered it had a job. Mom's kitchen light made a square on the grass. Dad's silhouette filled the back steps. He didn't raise the gun. He didn't move at all. Dad, I said, and my voice was as big as everything I felt. Don't? Gray rumbled, low, a question that ended on a period when I touched his neck. Dad worked his jaw. He put the gun down slowly, like he'd had to tell his hands a story about why. He came down the steps. He stopped 10 feet away. Up close, the night made him look softer than day did. Or maybe it was the way fear rearranges faces. Okay, he said. Okay. Olivia's van turned into the drive before the sun finished breaking. She saw us, the girl, the wolf, the father, the yard that wasn't built for this, and blinked like her brain had to load a new program to handle it. Well, she said. I've never had coffee that strong. We worked the wound with saline and shame and thanks. Gray let it happen because my hand never left him while it did. When Olivia was done, she sat back in the grass and looked at Dad. If we box him, it breaks him, she said. If we do nothing, the town will. We need a third way. Soft release. Dad asked like he'd been carrying the idea around like a coin he worried with his thumb. There's a fenced acreage on the far side of the North Fork, Olivia said. It's not a cage. It's land with boundaries, miles of it. Elk winter there. Plenty of rabbits. No cattle. No people. We collar him, watch him, make sure he relearns the world without traps. If he keeps pushing fences even there, we'll know. But I don't think he will. Dad nodded. He looked at Gray. Gray looked back, and for a second I swore they saw the same thing. Me at 10, too small, too stubborn, and the way love makes bad math work out anyway. How do we get him there? Dad asked. Olivia smiled at me like she didn't want to scare me with the size of her faith. We ask. I didn't sleep before we left. I lay on the rug with Gray's breath nudging the hair on my arm and thought about fences. Good ones, bad ones, and the ones you carry inside and don't know you do until the right person taps them and they ring. We drove into the mountains in a little convoy. Olivia's van in front, our pickup behind, the sheriff's Tahoe ghosting along in case anybody decided to turn this into a parade. Gray lay in the van, not tranked, head between his paws, eyes half-lidded like a wolf who'd seen weirder and decided to give this version a chance. I sat cross-legged on the rubber mat with my hand on his shoulder and counted the posts along the road because numbers make good walls when you need them. We crossed the North Fork where it braided itself around stones the size of cows, water green like bottled glass. We turned off the pavement onto a two-track that climbed till the truck complained. The gate at the top of the rise was taller than Dad and strung with wire so tight it sang when Olivia palmed the latch. Beyond lay a bowl of land so pretty it hurt, grass like a promise, aspen coins flipping in a wind you could see, and a ridge backlit so hard it looked cut from paper. Olivia clipped the collar on while Gray watched the sky over my shoulder. The box on the strap blinked red, then green like a tiny heartbeat. We stood there a minute, a girl, a father, a vet, and a thing that belonged to none of us, and we breathed together the way people at the edge of a cliff do when they haven't decided yet whether the drop is a friend. Okay, Olivia said softly. Okay. We walked through. We didn't close the gate right away. I don't know why. Maybe we wanted him to understand that even boundaries can be choices if you make them with someone who loves you. Gray stepped into grass that hadn't known his feet before and paused. His nose wrote a paragraph in the air. He looked at me long and full, the way eyes can be hands if you let them. Go on, I said. Go see. He went, slow at first like he was listening to what the ground had to say. Then faster, then a lope, the kind of movement you only get when a body remembers how it's supposed to feel inside itself. He didn't look back. I did. I looked at Dad and Mom when she climbed out of the truck with tears she pretended were from the wind, and Olivia with her hands on her hips and her smile tucked away somewhere deep where she kept the good china. We latched the gate. We drove home in a morning that had the nerve to be ordinary. Weeks braided into months. School started and was what school always is. Too much of what you don't care about and not enough of what you do. Jasper learned to sit and to chew only the things we said he could, which meant nothing whatsoever. Mom painted a mural in the library that made the second graders think they could walk straight into the ocean. Dad checked Olivia's emails before dinner. Sometimes the collar went quiet and my stomach did a slow backflip, and then it woke and we all breathed again. The first snow came on a Tuesday. It didn't stick, just spun like a thought that hadn't decided whether to land. I walked the fence line after chores the way I always did, trailing my glove along the top wire, shocking myself on the cold for the thrill of it. The sky was that big western gray that belongs in paintings. I reached the cottonwoods and was about to turn back when I felt it. Being watched. It's a thing you can invent if you're lonely. It's also a thing that can be real. I turned. He stood on the little hill, the elk, like in November, just inside the line where our land became the other land. Snow ticked at his fur. He was heavier now, a winter animal wearing winter. The collar flashed once like a wink. He didn't come closer. I didn't either. We looked. We held a world between us that had started in a marsh and gone through a barn and found the kind of ending that isn't an ending at all. "Hi," I said, and my breath made a cloud. His ears tipped forward. He huffed once, soft enough I had to imagine it to hear it. Then he turned and slid into the stand of aspen coins gone white. I stood there until my fingers burned from cold, not moving because moving would make it something else. Behind me the house lights came on. Mom called my name the way she always did, with that note at the end that means "Come back to me, please." On the way in, I thought about fences again. About the kind that keep the wrong out and the right in, and the kind that tell you who you are. I thought about the night I made a choice with my whole body, and how Dad made a different one with his, and how both were love trying hard. There's a thin place where wild and human touch. It's not big and it's not safe. It's a place you can only walk if you listen for a heartbeat that isn't yours and promise it you'll leave when it tells you to. That night, before the video ended and the credits slid up and the comments asked their questions, I said the thing I meant to say all along, the thing I wish somebody had said to Grady and to the parts of me that thought traps were the only way to feel powerful. If you're still here, tell me where you're listening from. Drop your town in the comments. And if you believe in second chances the way I do, tap the like, hit subscribe, and share this with the one person who thinks wild things can't be saved. They can. Sometimes they save us right back. 3 mornings later, Dad found the print outside the barn. A wolf track sharp as a stamp in the mud. He crouched, laid his hand over it, and his palm didn't cover the spread. He looked at me then, eyes narrow, not saying the word he didn't need to. "Emma," he said slowly, "what are you keeping from me?" The world inside me jolted. My mouth filled with dust. I wanted to lie, but lies wobble when you're 10 and Dad could always tell. "In the Miller barn," I whispered. I pulled him out of a trap. The color drained from Dad's face like somebody had wrung it. His jaw set. He walked back to the porch, unlocked the gun cabinet, and took out the shotgun. "You stay inside," he said. "No," the word tore out of me like bark ripping from a tree. His head snapped, his voice turned iron. "Emma." But I was already running. I burst into the barn just as Dad's shadow reached the cottonwoods. The wolf raised his head, eyes sharp even through pain. I stood in front of him, arms spread like a ridiculous scarecrow. Dad's silhouette filled the doorway. The gun sagged at his side, but his voice was steady. "Move, Emma. Please," I begged. "He's not, he won't hurt anyone. He trusts me." The wolf growled, low, vibrating through the wooden floorboards. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning, a line in the dirt. Dad froze. I think he saw it. The space between me and the wolf wasn't fear. It was something else. He lowered the gun. Slammed the door from outside. The bar clattered down. I was locked in with the wolf, my chest hammering, tears hot in my eyes. "It's okay," I whispered to him, not sure which of us I meant it for. He lowered his head onto his paws, watching me, and didn't growl again. Word travels fast in still water. By afternoon, trucks rolled up our dirt road. Men got out, faces tight, hands carrying whatever they could find, axes, pitchforks, shotguns that hadn't been cleaned in years. Grady Miller was in front. His missing fingers made the axe look stranger, meaner. "John," he shouted toward our porch. "Hand it over. We ain't living next to no wolf." Dad stepped out, no gun, palms up. "Go home. The sheriff's on his way. You and your city rule's gonna get that girl killed." Grady's eyes burned. "I'll do it myself." He lunged, but neighbors grabbed his arms. The mob hissed and argued. Fear and anger, they smelled the same. Then a white van pulled in, red cross on the side. A woman stepped out in scrubs under a denim jacket, calm like she'd seen worse. "Olivia Carter," she said. "Wildlife Rescue." Her voice cut through the crowd like glass through rope. People muttered, but nobody moved as the sheriff's lights rolled in behind her. Dad nodded once, jaw tight with relief. "He's inside," he said. But when Olivia and Dad opened the barn door, the straw was empty. Boards in the back wall sagged, clawed wide enough for a desperate body to squeeze through. Blood drops led into the trees. "He's gone," Olivia said, scanning the trail. I bit my lip until I tasted iron. That night I barely slept. But the next evening, Dad slid his laptop across the table. A trail cam photo, grainy green, showed him, the wolf, standing tall in the aspens, ribs visible, one back leg still stiff. "He's smart," Dad muttered. "Working the edges. But he's drifting toward town. Toward us." I pressed my hand to the screen like maybe he could feel it. Days blurred. Rumors spread. Then one morning the Johnsons' ewe was found dead. Fence nudged open like it had been touched by a careful hand. The sheriff shrugged. Grady cursed. Dad made a call to Olivia. His voice was low, heavy. When he hung up, his face looked carved from stone. "They'll try to trap him," he said. "Move him. If that doesn't work." He didn't finish. My stomach twisted. That night I packed. Flashlight, granola bars, Mom's old headlamp. A note, "I'll be back. I'm sorry. Don't follow me." The forest was a cathedral of dark. My breath came white, my boots cracking twigs. I followed the game trail, whispering, "Gray? It's me." The shadows moved. He stepped out, bigger than memory, ribs sharp under fur. At his feet lay a deer, fresh. His eyes caught the moonlight, burning gold. I lifted my palms. "They're coming tomorrow. They'll take you. Or worse." His ears flicked, as if the word worse was one he already knew. And then the forest changed. Shapes slid out from the trees, two wolves, larger, moving like smoke with weight. Their eyes fixed on Gray, not me. They circled, slow, deliberate. A challenge. Gray stiffened, lips peeled back, a snarl building like thunder. His wounded leg trembled but held. I didn't think. I ran forward, arms flailing. "Hey, get away." The pack froze, startled by the sound of something smaller and stupider than they expected. Gray moved, shoulder brushing my thigh, placing himself between me and them. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the leader huffed, almost contemptuous, and slid back into the trees. The second followed. Silence dropped like snow. Gray turned, blood glistening on his flank. He pressed his nose to my palm, hot breath shivering against me. "We have to go," I whispered. And for the first time he followed. By dawn we stumbled into our backyard. Mom's kitchen light glowed, Dad's silhouette stood on the steps. His shotgun was in his hands. "Dad," I said, voice breaking. "Please, don't." Gray leaned against me, a ghost made of fur and scars. Dad froze. The barrel sagged. Slowly, deliberately he lowered the gun. "Okay," he said. His voice cracked. "Okay." The morning air was sharp enough to cut. Frost smoked off the grass as Olivia's van rolled into our yard again, Sheriff's Tahoe behind it. Neighbors had gathered at the end of the road, watching like a jury waiting to hand down a sentence. Gray stood beside me in the yard, his weight pressed against my leg. His eyes tracked every sound, every movement, but he didn't growl. He just was solid, battered, unbroken. Olivia stepped out, tranquilizer rifle slung but unused. She froze when she saw me with him in the open. "Well," she said softly, "that's unexpected." Dad looked from me to Gray and back again, his jaw twitching. "If we box him, he'll break," he said to Olivia. "If we leave him, the town will kill him." "Then we need a third option," Olivia said. Her eyes softened, finding mine. "There's a fenced acreage on the far side of the North Fork. Not a cage, land. Miles of it. Elk, rabbits, no cattle, no people. We collar him, watch him, give him a chance to remember who he is. If he pushes fences even there, we'll know. But I don't think he will." Dad nodded slowly as if the decision was already made inside him. "How do we get him there?" Olivia's smile flickered. "We ask. We didn't sedate him. We didn't shove him in a crate. We opened the van's back, spread blankets, and I climbed inside. Gray followed, hesitant at first, then calm once my hand stayed on his shoulder. He lay down, head heavy on my thigh. His eyes stayed open, watching the shifting world outside. The drive wound into the mountains, past ridges gold with larch, creeks flashing like broken mirrors. Every bump rattled through him, but he didn't fight. I stroked his fur and whispered stories, the kind I used to tell myself falling asleep, about rivers that ran forever, about skies too big to hold. We crossed the North Fork where the water foamed green around boulders the size of houses. At the ridge top, Olivia stopped. A tall gate stretched wide, wire taut as piano strings. Beyond it lay a bowl of wild land so beautiful it hurt, grass rippling like water, aspens shining like coins, mountains rising behind like guardians. "This is it," Olivia murmured. Dad and the sheriff stood back. Olivia clipped a GPS collar around Gray's neck, the small light blinking green, steady like a second heartbeat. I knelt, pressed my forehead to his. "Go," I whispered. "Go see." The gate swung open. He stepped through, slow at first. His nose rode in the air. He paused, looked back at me one last time, the kind of look that says more than words ever can. Then he moved. A lope, then a run, faster, freer, until he was only a gray streak vanishing into grass and light. My chest ached, but not from loss. From something bigger, like part of me had gone with him and part of him had stayed. Dad's arm slipped around my shoulders. His voice was low. "Sometimes the wild has to stay wild, Emma?" I nodded, tears sliding down my face. "I know. But I also knew something else. He wasn't gone. Not really." Weeks braided into months. The collar beeped steady updates on Olivia's screen. Gray ranged across the acreage, hunting, resting, staying clear of the fences. The town forgot him, more or less. Grady Miller grumbled, but the sheriff kept a close eye, and traps disappeared from the marsh one by one. Winter came, white and endless. School dragged. Mom painted murals on the library walls. Dad patrolled the park lines. Jasper the puppy chewed everything except what he was allowed. And me, I waited. It was March when it happened. Snow softened, the air smelled of thawing earth. I walked the fence line after chores, trailing my glove on the top wire, the sky a flat pewter. That feeling came, being watched. I turned. He stood on the hill beyond the fence, heavier now, scars silvered. His fur thick with winter, his eyes catching the pale light. The GPS collar blinked once like a star. He didn't come closer. He didn't need to. I raised my hand in the cold air. "Hi," I whispered. He flicked an ear. A soft huff rolled across the space between us, barely sound, more a breath carried by distance. Then he turned, melted into the aspens, gone as if he'd never been. But I knew he'd be back, not here, not always, but somewhere watching, alive. That night, when I finished telling the story into the microphone, I let the silence stretch, then spoke the only words that mattered. If you're still here, drop your town in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. And if you believe wild things deserve second chances, tap like, hit subscribe, and share this with someone who thinks wolves can't be saved. Because sometimes they save us right back. A year can sand the edges off a hard thing, or it can cut it clean. In Stillwater it did both. By spring, the collar's green blink had become part of our kitchen, like the clock above the stove. Olivia would text Dad pings from the ridge, from the willow flats, from the far bowl where elk winter and the snow keeps its secrets late. I grew in ways you can't see on a doorframe. I learned where the creek braids widen in May and where the cottonwoods whisper first when a storm is still hours away. I learned the names of raptors by the way they hold the sky. Jasper learned to heal, mostly, and to love the porch sun more than my shoelaces. Mom's mural in the library made second graders reach for fish that weren't there. Dad's laugh returned, but softer, like he'd rerouted it around a place that still hurt in good ways. And Gray made the land mean we again. The first time we saw him with company, it was the kind of morning that smells like cold metal and wet sage. Dad spread Olivia's latest map on the table, red dots in a slow spill along the fence line. "Look at the pattern," Olivia said, tapping. "Not random. Parallel tracks, different stride lengths. He's not alone anymore." I felt it before I understood it, relief that didn't lower my shoulders so much as anchor them. I imagined the silent conversations wolves have with the ground and one another, the brushes, the pauses, the ways they decide who moves first. Gray had found a shape to belong to. He'd stopped being a question that kept me up at night. He brought them near the fence once in late June, when the meadow's first hay was high and swallows stitched the air shut. I didn't tell Dad I was going. He knew anyway. I carried nothing but a thermos and my usual ridiculous hope and walked the fence line like a pilgrim tracing a saint's statue. They were there on the hill, gray and darker gray in a color like storm. 3. One smaller. Ears too big, legs too long for the body, the way teenagers look between selves. Gray stood a step ahead. He had filled out, the winter scars silvered into his coat like wires under snow. The GPS collar flashed once and then behaved, a lighthouse with only one ship to guide. "Hi," I whispered, hand raised, palm open to air. The younger one leaned forward. Gray's head turned an inch. The teenager stepped back. The space between us wasn't fear. It was something like grammar, the right pause in the right place so the sentence stays true. We held the moment, then let it go. They slid into the aspens like they were born from them, and I stayed until my thermos went cold and Dad's whistle came low and steady across the meadow. If you're still listening, tell me in the comments if you've ever felt it, that fine wire humming between you and something wild, the kind that makes you stand still just so you don't break it. I want to read those. I read them all. By August, the mountains wore that dull, tired green that means they're thirsty. Clouds built grand arguments and refused to rain. The wind came hot off the prairie. Everybody smelled smoke even when there was none. Fire is a story we tell ourselves out here every summer. Some years it listens, some years it answers. The lightning found us on a Tuesday just after supper. It came on like a drumline, strike after strike walking the ridges, counting off the peaks. Mom unplugged the coffee maker. Dad moved his radio to the porch and put on his boots without looking at them. Olivia's text, "Heads up, North Fork strike," buzzed 3 times. Then the call. "Spot fire in the South Bowl," a voice said through static. "Wind shift. We're putting a crew on it, but it's chewing through cured grass like fuse." Dad's eyes went to me and then to the ridge where our fence became the world's. He didn't say don't. He said, "If we get an evac notice, you go with Mom. Straight to the church lot. No just one thing in the house. You hear me?" "I hear you." The sky turned the wrong color an hour later, bruised apricot, ugly and beautiful. Ash sifted down like a memory somebody else had burned. The siren at the volunteer fire station wailed once, twice, 3 times. The phone buzzed, "Level 1, be ready." Then Level 2. Then the kind of silence that tastes like pennies. Olivia called from the gate in a voice tight as steel cable. "We've got wildlife bottlenecked in the South Bowl. FWP is opening the south gate, but the service road is blocked. I need a chainsaw team and, John, I need your bolt cutters. The old service fence, if it shorts they'll pile against it and it'll be bad." Dad was already moving. I grabbed my pack without asking permission and heard Mom's inhale behind me. "Kelly," Dad said, touching her shoulder. "She knows the creek better than anybody. If the road's gone, we take the bed." Mom looked at me like you look at a thing you can't keep from breaking. Then she nodded once, the kind of nod that trusts a bridge because you've walked it in your mind 100 times. "Go. Stay on his hip." We took the creek. The ash turned the water into a thin gray tea, moving in skin-slick ripples around the stones. Cottonwood fluff stuck to the wet on our faces and turned into paste. The fire wasn't a roar yet, it was a far freight train, rumbling over a part of your life you can't get to fast enough. The sky snapped, dry branches somewhere high. The wind, bored of being reasonable, pivoted. The south gate was where Olivia said it was, only meaner. A post down, a deadfall twisted through the wire like a man who didn't want to be hugged. The padlock was black with soot and old arguments. Olivia met us there with 2 volunteers, a Pulaski, and a look that said we were all already inside the same decision. "Collar pings are inside the bowl," she said, waving the tablet. "They're pacing the fence. We open now or we open too late." Dad went after the lock, bolt cutters biting like a promise. The chain fell. We shouldered the gate, 5 bodies, 1 breath, hinges screaming, and rolled it wide to the hinge stop. Heat hit us in a flat, steady wall. The bowl beyond was full of elk, eyes wild, calves pressed to flanks, mule deer knocking their knees on each other, foxes too tired to be clever. Birds poured over the ridgeline like river water going the wrong way. And there, along the base of the bowl, ghosts becoming bodies in the wrong light. Gray and his 3 working the edge, holding together because packs are knots you tie with your whole self. He saw us. He didn't flinch. He lifted his head like acknowledgement and then did the job the land had given him. He flowed along the herd, not scattering, not panicking, just moving, putting his shape where the elk needed it to go forward instead of through us. "Back," Dad said. "Give them a lane." We pressed to the fence and became posts. The herd came like weather. A bull cleared the gate in a leap that put his body 2 years younger. Hooves clattered on the old road. Calves bawled. The creek hissed where embers fell into it. Heat tugged at the hair on my arms, a child's hand begging you to notice. Gray reached the gate last. He slowed, shoulder to shoulder with the teenager who wasn't a teenager anymore. Longer legs, new certainty to the way he set his feet. The smaller wolf, female I thought from the way the 2 moved, stayed tight to Gray's hip. They made eye contact with me. Not a human idea, not a fairy tale magic trick, just the way animals check a thing to make sure it is what it says. "Go," I managed, though my mouth was paced. They didn't need my permission. They passed through the open into our side, then beyond our side into a world that was, briefly, both. Olivia shoved the gate with both palms and a sound I'd only ever heard in church. The hinge stop caught. The fire wind touched the fence and thought about it and then decided it had other places to be. We moved downhill in the creek, the smoke chasing and then forgetting. The sheriff's Tahoe loomed out of the ash, ghost blue in a world that had been red and went gray. He leaned out the window, face streaked with soot and surprise, and said, "Well, hell," very gently, like a prayer that had worked. Evac Level 3 hit phones across the valley while we were still sucking creek water off our shirts. Mom's truck slid into the church lot an hour later with Jasper whining like all his parts were alarms. We stood in a constellation of lawn chairs and blankets and watched the edge of our world turn into a different color. Kids pretended it was a movie. Grown-ups pretended they believed themselves when they said it would be fine. In the morning, the ridge was charcoal lace, the kind you see on wedding dresses, only wrong. The bowl had gone to stubble and black glass. But the fence stood. The gate stood. And the elk prints cut 100 new lines into the ash where they'd chosen not to die. The collar pinged south for 2 days, then west. Olivia's text came in clipped and fretful. Battery low. Signal jumpy. Might lose it. Then one noon when the sun made no promises and the wind forgot to move, a last blink. A timed release. Somewhere under an aspen that had lived through worse than this, the collar dropped and waited for nobody. Sometimes that's the best ending, Olivia said on our porch, rolling the dead device in her palm like a stone from a river. No news is the right news. We tried to believe her. Then we did. The valley greened in ways that made people cry in grocery aisles. Fire does that, kills what it needs to and then grows back what you forgot you missed. The South Bowl wore a fuzz of grass that made the elk calves reckless. Aspen stems shot up in daggers so tender you could bend them with breath. The cottonwoods hummed again. A year to the week after we opened the gate, Dad came in from checking the new fence line with a look I couldn't read and a packet under his arm. He set it on the table like a gift he wasn't sure we'd earned. Inside, a single photograph printed on the cheap glossy paper Olivia's office kept in the cabinet for proof of life. Trail cam. Night vision. Grainy green. 4 wolves. 1 larger, deeper chested. 2 almost matching behind. And in front of them, a smaller body with a head too big for its legs and ears like questions. Pup. Not one I'd seen last summer. A new grammar. He stood with them. And if a picture can feel like a sound, this one felt like the high, thin keen of a cedar violin. A happiness with a thread of ache through it. That evening I walked the fence line without thermos or plan. The air was cool the way it only is when heat has been earned. Jasper bumped my calf and then got distracted by a vole that had no interest in being part of our story. I reached the hill without realizing I'd been aiming for it and stood while the sun considered whether to make a show of the day it had already done. They came light, more idea than shape at first. The pack held on the far slope, wind in their faces, bodies long with the run. Gray lifted his head. The pup tripped on nothing, scrambled to his feet, tried to pretend he'd meant to bow. The almost matching pair flanked, steady. The female with the storm coat stood 1 step behind Gray's shoulder. I wondered if she dreamed in the same colors he did. We didn't wave. We don't ask wild things to greet us like neighbors. We breathed and maybe that was the same thing. The pup took 2 bold steps downhill. Gray turned his head a fraction and the pup stopped as if the earth had reminded him of something he'd promised. He sat, haunches thumping in a rhythm that made him look suddenly exactly like every puppy in every yard, loved by some kid with a stick and a pocket full of gum wrappers. I laughed, and the sound broke something open in my chest in a way that didn't hurt. "Thank you," I said, not sure who I meant. The wind shifted, bringing them our scent. 4 noses twitched. Jasper finally noticed and went very still, head cocked, tail low. Every good instinct he'd been born with switching on in an instant. I touched his shoulder and felt the electric hum in him settle into a line we could hold. Gray's gaze found mine. You can invent that. You can also witness it. It wasn't ownership or debt. It wasn't a fairy tale promise. It was recognition. We lived the same story once, it said. We'll live different ones now. That's the point. The sun slid. The coins on the aspens turned from gold to something you can't buy. The 4 moved as one into the whiteness of trunks and the gray beyond them. The hill emptied without feeling gone. I stayed until the first star said my name. At home, Mom had left the porch light on in the way only mothers in lighthouses know. Dad sat on the steps and handed me a mug that wasn't coffee and wasn't cocoa and tasted like the end of a good thing that keeps going anyway. "You see them?" he asked. I nodded. "He has a pup." Dad's look tilted towards sky. "Of course he does." We didn't talk about Grady Miller. There wasn't much to say. He sold his place that winter, slid east to a town without a creek big enough to forgive him, without neighbors who knew his bad shape by the way he walked. Traps went quiet in Stillwater. Maybe they'll be loud somewhere else. We do what we can where we are. When I finished telling all this into the mic, I didn't put a bow on it. Stories like this don't wear bows, they wear scars and grow back around them. If you're still here, I said, tell me where you're listening from tonight. City, ridge, porch, swing, truck, cab. I want to see the map we're making together. And if you've ever stood at a fence and felt it turn into a line that connected instead of divided, hit like, subscribe, share it with someone who thinks wild and human can't live parallel without crossing. They can. But only if we listen for the heartbeat that isn't ours. Only if we leave when it tells us to. Jasper thumped his tail on the floor twice like a period. And out past the cottonwoods, somewhere between our story and theirs, a wolf lifted his head and sang one clean line into the dark. I couldn't hear it with my ears. That wasn't the point. I heard it anyway. Fall in Montana feels like the land is taking one long breath before winter clamps down. The air sharpens, the sun lowers, the cottonwoods drop coins of gold that clatter under boots and paws. I was 11 now, taller, my voice finding edges it didn't have a year before. But some things hadn't changed. I still walked the fence line, still listened for silence that wasn't empty, still carried gray in the corners of my thoughts. One October morning, Dad found me staring at the marsh, the same marsh where it all began. The cattails leaned brittle, the water a flat mirror holding the sky. Still thinking about it? He asked, voice gentle. Every time I come here, I admitted. It feels like the place is waiting. Dad nodded, scanning the reeds. Places remember. Not in the way we do. But they hold shapes. They keep stories. The old fence rails I had dragged a year ago still lay crooked across the mud, warped now, swallowed halfway by muck. Rust from the trap glinted faint in the grass, a stain the rain hadn't managed to erase. I crouched and touched the place where the iron teeth had bit into Gray's leg. My fingertips came away cold, like touching memory itself. I hated him for leaving scars, I whispered. Dad leaned beside me. Scars mean you made it through. They don't mean you lost. I thought about that for a long while. The marsh was quiet, but not dead. A frog plopped somewhere close. A heron lifted, wings wide enough to shade me for a second. When we walked back, the wind shifted. And I swear I heard it, the faintest echo of a howl, carried thin across the timber. Not close, not meant for me. But real. That winter was harsh. Snow piled higher than Jasper's head, drifts swallowing the mailbox, wind scouring the valley until the barns hummed like instruments. We shoveled paths that vanished overnight. Coyotes yipped near the school bus route. Everyone wore tiredness in their eyes. But even then, Gray wasn't far. Olivia showed me prints near the ridge camera, 4 sets plus the pup's smaller dots. Alive. Holding. They're thriving, she said, smiling like it hurt. Against all odds, they're doing it. Against all odds. The words tasted like truth. One evening in January, Dad surprised me. Grab your coat, he said. I want to show you something. We took the Ranger truck up past the ridge, chains clinking, headlights bouncing off snow crust. The world outside the cab looked like spilled sugar. He stopped near the overlook. The valley below spread wide, silver and blue under a swollen moon. Listen, he said. At first it was only wind. Then clear and true a chorus rose, for maybe 5 voices layered, weaving. A wolf song, long and aching, the kind that slides under your ribs and lifts you with it. One voice led. I knew it. I felt it in the bones that had knelt in the marsh, in the palms that had held a muzzle too heavy to lift. Gray. I didn't cry. I smiled so hard it hurt. Dad squeezed my shoulder, rough glove against my jacket. That sound, he said. That's what second chances feel like. We stood there until our breath froze on our scarves and the chorus faded into silence. Spring came again, slower this time, cautious after winter's bite. And on the first warm Saturday, I walked back to the marsh. Not sneaking, not running, just walking like I had a right to. The fence boards were gone, swallowed. The hummock was still there, small and stubborn. A muskrat scurried across, leaving ripples. I sat on the edge and let my boots sink a little into mud. This place had tried to take him, but it hadn't. It had given me him. Thank you, I said, to mud and water and memory. The wind stirred the cattails. And I imagined, just for a moment, another pair of eyes watching from the tree-lean. Not close. Not tame. But near enough to remind me that the line between wild and human is thinner than anyone wants to admit. That night, when I finished recording the story, I leaned close to the mic. If you've made it this far, I said softly, tell me in the comments if you believe scars can be beautiful. Tell me if you've ever stood in the place where something broke you, and realized it gave you something too. And if you do, hit like, subscribe. Share this with someone who thinks endings mean the story's over. Because sometimes an ending is just a beginning we don't recognize yet. Jasper sighed at my feet, his tail thumping once. And out in the valley, carried faint and wild through the night, a single howl rose, clean, sure, alive. I smiled. I didn't need to hear the rest.
Bye-bye!